There is a motion that is not a motion. There is a change that does not change. There is an act that contains no potentiality. Aristotle calls it the unmoved mover. We have encountered this concept before in the argument against infinite regress. But that argument only proved that a first mover must exist. It did not describe or name what that mover is like. Aristotle spends the whole of Book Lambda of the Metaphysics filling in the description. The result is one of the most extraordinary portraits in the history of philosophy. Not a portrait of a god to be worshipped, but of a conclusion to be accepted. A being whose attributes are forced upon us by logic, not by revelation. Let us reconstruct that portrait stroke by stroke. The first stroke, the unmoved mover, is immaterial. Everything material is subject to change. Matter is potentiality, the capacity to become this or that. Wood can become a table, a chair, a door, a sculpture. Bronze can become a statue, a shield, a bell, a coin. Flesh can become healthy or sick, young or old, living or dead. But the unmoved mover has no unrealized potential. It is fully, completely, eternally what it is. It cannot become anything else because there is nothing else for it to become. It is pure actuality. Therefore, it cannot be composed of matter. Matter is the principle of potentiality. The unmoved mover is the principle of actuality. They are opposites. Now, the second stroke, the unmoved mover, is simple. Composition implies parts. Parts imply the possibility of rearrangement. Rearrangement implies change. Change implies unrealized potential. Otherwise, it wouldn't be changing. That's the implication of change. Change implies unrealized potential. So a thing with parts could be reorganized. Its parts could be separated, recombined, replaced. But the unmoved mover cannot be reorganized because it has no parts to reorganize. It is not a collection of components. It is one, indivisible, without composition. Now the third stroke is that the unmoved mover is eternal. Everything that comes into being does so through change. Potentiality becomes actuality. The seed becomes the tree becomes the timber becomes the house. But the unmoved mover did not come into being. It did not emerge from potentiality to actuality. It has always been fully actual. It has no beginning. It has no end. It simply is. Fourth stroke is the unmoved mover is perfect. Perfection is the absence of lack. To lack something is to have the potential to acquire it. The unmoved mover has no unrealized potential. Therefore, it lacks nothing. Therefore, it is perfect. This is not moral perfection, though it may include moral perfection. It is ontological perfection, the fullness of being, the completeness of actuality, the absence of any deficiency. And the fifth stroke is the unmoved mover is intelligent. Intelligence is a form of actuality. To think is to be active in the highest degree. To think perfectly is to be perfectly active. The unmoved mover, being pure actuality, must therefore be pure intelligence. But what does it think? It cannot think about the world. The world is imperfect, changing, contingent. To think about imperfect things would be to have an imperfect object of thought. It would be beneath the dignity of the perfect being. It cannot think about anything less than itself. To think about something inferior would be to direct its attention away from its own perfection. It would be a kind of distraction, a diminishment. Therefore, it thinks about itself. It is thought-thinking thought. Its object is its own infinite perfection. It contemplates eternally, without interruption or variation, the fullness of its own being. Now, this portrait raises a problem. A being that thinks only about itself, that contemplates its own perfection without regard for anything outside itself, is this a being we can relate to? Can we love such a being? Can it love us? Aristotle does not ask these questions. They are not relevant to his project. He is describing the logical structure of reality, not the object of religious devotion. The unmoved mover is a principle, not a person. But the portrait itself pushes toward personality. Thought implies consciousness. Consciousness implies subjectivity. Subjectivity implies self-awareness. Self-awareness implies, if not love, then at least a kind of self-regard. The unmoved mover is not a stone or a force or an equation. It is a mind that knows itself perfectly, eternally, without distraction. This is not yet the God of Abraham, but it is no longer the God of the philosophers either. It is something in between, a logical necessity that has acquired the attributes of a person. Now consider how this being relates to the world. Aristotle is clear. The unmoved mover does not act upon the world in the way that an efficient cause acts upon its effect. It does not push, pull, shape, or manipulate. It does not intervene in history, respond to prayers, or perform miracles. It simply is. That is Aristotle's view. And its being is so perfect, so complete, so utterly actual, that everything else strives to imitate it. This is the doctrine of final causation. The unmoved mover is not the efficient cause of the world's motion, but the final cause. It is the beloved, not the lover, the goal, not the agent, the end toward which all things tend, not the beginning from which all things come. That is Aristotle's view. The stone falls because it wants to be at rest, and the unmoved mover is perfect rest. The fire rises because it wants to be near the celestial spheres, and the unmoved mover is perfect actuality. The plant grows because it wants to reproduce, and the unmoved mover is perfect fecundity. And the unmoved mover is, well, the animal moves because it wants to survive, and the unmoved mover is perfect life. The human thinks because it wants to know, and the unmoved mover is perfect knowledge. Everything in its own way is trying to be like God. Now, this is a beautiful vision, but it is also a problematic one. If the unmoved mover is only the final cause, not the efficient cause, then it is not the creator of the world. It does not bring the world into being. It does not sustain the world into existence. It does not govern the world's affairs. The world in Aristotle's system is eternal. It has always existed and will always exist. The motion of the celestial spheres, the cycles of generation and decay, the succession of species, all of this is without beginning or end. The unmoved mover is the ground of this motion, not its origin. It is the reason why motion continues, not the reason why motion began. It is the anchor of the chain, but the chain itself has no first link. And this is why the medieval philosophers, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, found Aristotle both indispensable and insufficient. He gave them the logic of the first cause, but he denied that the first cause was a creator. He gave them the portrait of a perfect intelligence, but he denied this intelligence cared about the world. They had to revise him. They had to merge his unmoved mover with the creator of Genesis, the father of Jesus, the Allah of the Quran. They had to say, the first cause is not only the final cause, but also the efficient cause. It is not only the beloved, but also the lover. It is not only the end, but also the beginning. The merger was not a corruption of Aristotle. It was a completion of Aristotle. He had given them the architecture. They supplied the inhabitant. So now we must ask, what did Aristotle himself think about this? He does not say. He stops at the threshold. He describes the unmoved mover in terms that seem to invite personal interpretation, thought, intelligence, self-awareness. But he never calls it a person. He never prays to it. He never suggests that it knows or cares about the world. And why? Perhaps because he was a philosopher, not a theologian. His method was dialectic, not revelation. He could only affirm what could be demonstrated through logical argument, and logical argument cannot prove that the first cause is a person who loves us. It can only prove that the first cause is a mind that thinks itself. Perhaps because he was cautious, he knew that the unmoved mover as a logical necessity was already controversial. To attribute personality to it would be to invite ridicule from his materialist predecessors and suspicion from his religious contemporaries. Better to stop at the threshold. And perhaps because he was honest, he had followed the argument as far as it could go, and it had led him to a being that was pure thought, perfect actuality, eternal self-contemplation. He could not honestly say more than the argument allowed. So he stopped. He left the threshold uncrossed. Now here's what you've learned. You've learned that the unmoved mover as a logical necessity must be immaterial, simple, eternal, perfect, and intelligent. These attributes are not derived from religious belief, but from the structure of causation itself. You have learned that the unmoved mover is not an efficient cause, but a final cause. It does not act upon the world, it attracts the world. It is the beloved, not the lover, the goal, not the agent. You have learned that this portrait is incomplete, the unmoved mover's mind, but it does not know the world. It is perfect, but it does not create. It is eternal, but it does not enter time. And you have learned that the later thinkers working within the Aristotelian framework felt compelled to complete the portrait. So they merged the unmoved mover with the creator. They gave it efficient as well as final causality. They made it not only the beloved, but also the lover. Aristotle stopped at the threshold. The threshold is still there. The question is not, rather, whether the unmoved mover exists. The question is, who will cross the threshold? Thank you.